We answer to no banner now. The unstoppable bond forged to face a war no empire can win. The great hall of resonance glowed with the silver-blue light of embedded star crystals, each one humming faintly, as if echoing the heartbeat of the empire itself. Orenya stood at the center of the circular dais, her slender frame wrapped in a ceremonial gown of silver-threaded silk over light armor plates, the kind designed to show both authority and readiness for battle. The weight on her shoulders was not the garment, but the knowledge that she had no choice. Her father, Emperor Raven of Arcanus, had decreed it. The Heart of Resonance ceremony was not a matter for consent. It was an ancient covenant binding two worlds together. She had argued, pleaded, even threatened to abdicate, but the Emperor's voice had been steel. If you refuse, the Steel Star Alliance will break the treaty and war will return. Your life is not only your own. Rygar was already there, a towering figure in black runic armor, the steel star crest glinting against his chestplate. His expression was impassive, but his jaw was clenched, the way a man clenches it before walking into gunfire. The Heart of Resonance had been performed only 7 times in recorded history. Always in the same place, the hall built over the very first cleft stone, a crystal shard said to have fallen from the heavens during the First War. Its meaning was unity, but also permanence. Once the resonance took hold, there was no reversal. The records spoke of it as an honor. Orenya felt it as a trap. Before the ritual began, Archmage Avon approached, his staff clicking softly on the star-steel floor. He was a tall man, with hair like spun white glass and eyes clouded yet sharp, a contradiction carved by decades of magic. His voice was low enough for only them to hear. When the heart binds, it is not only thought and feeling that pass between you. Memories will bleed into memories. You will see each other's scars. You will carry each other's ghosts. Orenya's breath caught. You mean I won't be able to hide anything? Avon's gaze was steady. Not from him. Not from yourself. Rygar shifted almost imperceptibly, but his eyes stayed locked forward. Orenya wondered if he was as unsettled as she was. The Archmage knew because he had presided over the last binding, 42 years ago, a union that ended in madness. 2 minds that could not endure the weight of the other's truth. The mention of that history made her palms cold. The ritual began with both of them placing their right hands on the crystal pedestal. The cleft stone's surface was warm, pulsing like living flesh. Avon's voice rose in an incantation that filled the hall like a tide. Orenya felt the pull, a thread sinking into her mind, finding Rhaegar, weaving through thought and memory. Then with a suddenness that made her gasp, she heard him. Not his voice aloud, but the internal shape of it. Deep, clipped, wary. This is wrong. She stiffened, realizing he could hear her thoughts in return. You think I want this? She shot back instinctively, and saw a flicker of surprise in his steel-gray eyes. Then came the first unintentional leak, a flash in her mind that was not hers. Rygar on a battlefield of blackened earth under a green sky, driving a blade into an enemy, already on his knees. The image was sharp, the heat of the moment still burning in his veins. She flinched, his head tilted almost imperceptibly, and she knew he had caught something from her in return. Her memory of standing before her uncle's council chamber, overhearing whispered plans to remove the Emperor. They broke eye contact at the same moment, each retreating inward, walls slamming up. The connection was alive now, permanent, and with it came the realization that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy might not be their enemies, but the truths they now shared. The battlefield in Rygar's memory was unlike anything Orenya had ever seen. The air was thick with the stench of scorched metal and blood, the sky a poisonous green churned by orbital bombardments. It was the siege of Vargath Prime, 20 years past, a name whispered even in Arcanus military academies as a graveyard of armies. Through his eyes she saw rows of Steel Star soldiers breaking under a swarm of crimson-armored foes, alien war beasts tearing through the line. Rygar was in the thick of it, his black armor streaked with ash and ichor, his blade moving with brutal precision. He did not fight to survive, he fought to end. She felt the crunch of bone under his strikes, the hot spray across his visor, the cold certainty when he executed a surrendering enemy to prevent a counterattack. The clarity of it froze her. This was not just discipline. It was resolve shaped by loss so deep it had burned out hesitation. In that moment, her view of him shifted. He was not merely a soldier bound by orders, but a man forged in a place where mercy meant death. Rygar, in turn, had glimpsed her own private danger. From her mind spilled the image of her uncle, Lord Theron, leaning over a table in a shadowed chamber, his voice a low hiss as he spoke to three cloaked figures. The words were as sharp as a dagger. The Emperor must fall before the Steel Star Alliance could solidify, and the heart of resonance was their perfect pawn. If they could control Orenya, they could control the treaty. Rygar saw their faces, their insignia, their cold calculation. The knowledge settled in him like a blade hidden under his cloak. Orenya felt her stomach tighten when she realized he had seen it all. "You know," she whispered in the mind link, half accusation, half plea. His reply was level. "I know, and I'm not your enemy." She searched for deception, but found none. Only guarded steel. He could have used this to bargain with his commanders, but instead he locked it away for now. Revealing either truth would have been suicide. To expose Rygar's wartime past would fracture the fragile trust between empires. To accuse her uncle without proof would paint a target on her back. So they formed an unspoken pact. In public, they would be the perfect emblem of unity. Every council meeting, every appearance in the marble halls, they stood close enough to suggest harmony, spoke with a coordination that came from the link but passed as diplomacy. And yet, behind the seamless facade, the weight of what they knew pressed like a constant blade between their ribs. Every glance was a question, "Do you still hold my secret?" And every shared silence was a reminder that one misstep could destroy them both. The imperial court wasted no time turning the heart of resonance into a spectacle. For the Steel Star Alliance and the Arcanis Empire, public appearances were as vital as troop movements. The treaty's strength relied on the perception that their champions were united in purpose, if not in heart. A fracture, real or imagined, could embolden rivals and ignite border conflicts. Thus, 3 days after the ceremony, Orenya and Rygar stood side by side at the Great Convergence Hall, a chamber vast enough to host 1,000 delegates under its arched dome of glass and star metal. She wore a silver coronet over her cascade of violet hair, while his black armor had been polished to a mirror sheen, the runes faintly pulsing like embers. Behind the practiced grace of their posture lay hours of preparation, synchronized responses to possible questions, rehearsed gestures that implied familiarity. It was a performance designed to withstand the scrutiny of dozens of alien envoys, each searching for the smallest crack. Communication between them during the event was a dance of thought and reflex. With every mind touch, they passed observations in fragments. Left envoy suspicious? Watch the merchant prince. Don't react to the insult. There was no need for whispered asides. Once, during a tense debate over trade tariffs, Orenya caught Rygar's irritation at a veiled slight from a rival general and sent back a calm wave of reassurance, cooling his temper before it became visible. Yet even with their seamless coordination, there were moments when their eyes lingered too long, or their replies came with uncanny precision. More than one delegate left the hall murmuring that their bond seemed too perfect to be natural. Gradually, they began to exploit the link for diplomacy. Orenya could sense a shift in an ambassador's emotions before it reached his face, detecting fear, doubt, or greed in the subtle tremors of thought. Rygar, trained to read combatants, could track the smallest change in posture, the twitch of a hand toward a concealed weapon, the weight of a step that betrayed unease. Together, they sidestepped a looming disaster when an alien dignitary arrived with an undisclosed entourage of armed guards. Orenya caught the man's sudden spike of anxiety through the link. Rygar read the tension in his guard's stance. A quick diversion in conversation bought enough time for Imperial security to intervene quietly, turning a potential diplomatic incident into nothing more than an awkward pause. In moments like that, trust began to flicker between them, like the first embers of a reluctant fire. Still, it was far from unshakable. Rygar could not fully trust Orenya, while her uncle's shadow lingered in her mind. and she suspected that some of Rygar's memories, especially those of Vargoth Prime, held more than he allowed her to see. They maintained small, defensive habits. Rygar always stood at an angle that kept her in his periphery, never with his back turned. Orenya rarely shared unguarded thoughts, framing them instead in layers of calculated calm. The rift between them was not one of open hostility, but of two warriors waiting for proof that the other would not strike first. And until that proof came, the wall between them would stand. Once a year at the height of the twin moons, the capital of Arcanus erupted into light. The Starfire Festival marked the founding of the Empire and its opening to the stars, a celebration older than most of its worlds. Tonight, the Emperor himself presided, his presence lending the event the weight of law and legend. The streets were dressed in banners of deep blue and silver, the air alive with the hum of levitating lanterns drifting between the spires. Music from hundreds of instruments mingled with the chatter of thousands, merchants hawking wares from across the galaxy, children darting between stalls, diplomats weaving through the crowd like jeweled ships among asteroids. Above it all, the palace promenade gleamed, its crystalline arches reflecting the constellation-patterned lights. Orenya and Rygar arrived together at the central balcony, visible to the entire plaza. She wore a gown of flowing argent fabric over her ceremonial armor, every movement catching the light. Rygar remained in his rune-etched black plate, the contrast making them an arresting pair. "Smile," she murmured through the link. "I am," came his flat reply, though the corner of his mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. They waved to the crowd, answering the formal greetings of envoys and nobles. The first sign of trouble slipped in unnoticed, a cluster of masked performers moving too smoothly against the swirl of the celebration. Dressed in the bright silks of festival dancers, they passed security without question, each carrying ornate instruments that hummed faintly with an undertone that prickled against Orenya's senses. "Those aren't musicians," Rygar's thought was sharp in her mind. He had already spotted the telltale bulge of concealed weapons beneath the robes. The soul scribes assassins whispered about in war councils had found them. Their specialty was killing pairs, especially bonded minds, by turning the bond into a weapon. Without breaking their public poise, Rygar shifted fractionally to shield her. The assassins drew no steel. Instead, they produced small, star-shaped devices etched with spiraling glyphs. The moment the devices flared, Orenya felt the link between her and Rygar stretch taut, then burn. A flood of alien energy surged through the connection, dragging them both inward. Her vision fractured into shards of another place, a battlefield lit in sickly green, screams mixing with the roar of beasts. "Not real," Rygar's voice hammered in her mind, but the heat of a plasma blade still seared across her arm. In the physical world, their bodies swayed on the balcony, defenseless. Somewhere in the blur, Orenya glimpsed a shadowed figure far below, watching from the edge of the crowd, his hand resting on a control device. Whoever he was directing the attack, and he wanted them broken from within. The world around them dissolved into the nightmare of Vargoth Prime. The sky hung low, a bruise-colored dome split with streaks of green lightning from orbital bombardments. The ground was nothing but churned ash and blackened metal. Towers once belonging to the Vargothian citadel lay shattered, half buried in molten slag. Orenya's ears filled with the deafening roar of the enemy. The Graith Horde, towering insectoid warriors clad in chitinous armor that turned aside most blaster fire. Each movement of their bladed limbs carried the weight of inhuman strength. Rygar's memories poured into her, his unit torn apart in minutes, comrades falling around him, and the cold, brutal clarity that he would have to hold the line alone. Somewhere in that maelstrom, he had lost Captain Varen, the man who had trained him, cut down before Rygar could reach him. The grief was an old scar, but through the bond, Orenya felt it fresh, raw, and it made her gasp. The shock nearly unbalanced her, but Rygar's mental command snapped through the link. "Focus. Use what I know." The enemy formations unfolded in her mind like a tactical map. She could see their flanking patterns, their timing between assaults, their blind angles. She relayed positions and vulnerabilities without words, just images, pressure, and intent. Rygar moved in perfect sync with those mental cues, his blade sweeping low where she marked an exposed joint, his shield raised at the instant she sensed a projectile. Their thoughts braided tighter with each exchange, pulses matching, breaths sinking. Even their stances began to mirror one another. Signals passed between them as bursts of sensation, sharp heat for attack now, a cool drop for hold position, a flash of crimson when danger was immediate. At one point, Ryger felt her push a desperate surge of speed into his legs as a Graith brute lunged from the side, and together they pivoted, cutting it down before its scythe arm could strike. The moment they executed that maneuver without hesitation, they realized they had reached something close to total unity. Then, as abruptly as it began, the battlefield cracked like glass. Reality surged back. The festival plaza returned in a rush of sound, the music distorted, the crowd screaming. Orenya staggered, Rygar's hand braced on her arm. The mock crystals of the soul scribes lay shattered at their feet, and above them stood Archmage Avon, his staff still glowing from the counterspell. Several guards were down, wounded but alive. Two had been pulled clear with scorched armor. Through the haze, both Orenya and Rygar caught sight of the same fleeting shadow retreating into the crowd. It had the same gait, the same bearing as Lord Theron. The suspicions settled in them like a lock clicking shut. The bond between them felt different now, deeper, heavier. They had fought as one and survived, and neither could deny the power that gave them. In the quiet aftermath of the attack, when the plaza had been cleared and the bodies carried away, Orenya found herself replaying every movement Rygar had made in the illusion. His strikes had been clean and decisive, but more than that, he had adjusted seamlessly to her cues. She had never fought alongside someone who could translate her thoughts into action without hesitation. He listens, she realized, even when he doesn't agree. Rygar, for his part, could not ignore how her tactical mind had saved them. She had seen weaknesses in his enemies that he had overlooked in the heat of battle, weaving strategy into his raw power. "You read the field like a commander," he told her bluntly one night, the words free of flattery, which made them ring truer. The turning point came during a council meeting 2 days later. A hostile delegate tried to corner them with a trap-laden question about military deployment. Without speaking aloud, Orenya supplied the exact counterpoint Rygar needed. He delivered it flawlessly, and for the first time, she caught him looking at her with something other than guarded distance. From then on, their communication through the link carried less suspicion and more quiet certainty. It was that growing certainty that made Orenya broach the subject of the Grey Rift. The Vuk-Zam lay beyond the Empire's western border, a storm of warped space and tangled magic, where time fractured and the air shimmered with lethal currents of mana. To most, it was a forbidden place. To Orenya, it was the memory of captivity, 3 months locked within a prison ship adrift in the rift's edge after a failed diplomatic mission in her youth. The Empire had rescued her, but she had left part of herself there, a shadow she had never shared. "If you're to trust me," she said quietly through the link, "you should know what shaped me." Rygar listened without interruption, his gray eyes narrowing not in refusal, but calculation. "Then we'll go," he said simply. Reaching the rift required a vessel built for both astral navigation and magical shielding, rare enough that only the Imperial fleet kept them in number. They secured one through Avon's quiet influence, the Archmage handing over a sealed order that bypassed normal clearance. The journey had to be hidden. Orenya invented an excuse of visiting allied outposts, while Rygar arranged for their personal guard to be reassigned elsewhere. On the night of departure, the corridors of the palace seemed to listen, every step echoing too loud. At the hangar, Rygar muttered, "If they find out," and Orenya cut in, "They won't. We'll be back before anyone knows." Yet both of them understood the risk. Secrets were heavier when carried together. The moment their vessel pierced the threshold of the Vuk-Zam, the universe seemed to shudder. Outside the viewport, colors bled into each other in impossible ways, veins of molten gold coiling through seas of black-violet mist, shards of crimson light drifting like slow meteors. The air inside the cabin vibrated with a low, bone-deep hum, as if the rift itself was breathing. Sound came warped, distant and close all at once. Gravity shifted in subtle pulses. A pen on the console rolled upward before dropping back down. Through the spectral haze, Orenya glimpsed shadowy shapes gliding past. Leviathans of the rift, translucent creatures the size of fortresses, their bodies studded with bioluminescent orbs. "They don't see us," Rhaegar muttered, eyes narrowing at the drifting giants. "They don't care," Orenya replied quietly. "Only the truly dangerous things here notice you." She knew because this was once a prison, its chaotic magic used to isolate the most dangerous beings. Time itself bent here, making escape near impossible. It was amidst this chaos that their bond shifted. While steering the ship through a corridor of warped space, Orenya's hands moved on the controls, until suddenly they didn't feel entirely hers. Her gaze shifted involuntarily toward a flashing console, and Rhaegar's voice rang in her head. "Let me try." Her fingers moved with a precision not her own, the course correcting by a hair's breadth that she hadn't anticipated. She pulled back with a startled gasp. "You were controlling," he confirmed, his tone neutral but eyes sharp. "Your reflexes are faster than mine for fine maneuvers," she admitted grudgingly. Curious, she pushed back. A moment later, Rhaegar's hand rose from his lap without him commanding it, resting against the cabin bulkhead. "Not pleasant," he muttered. The sensation was strange, like being a passenger in your own body. Your thoughts pushed aside by another's. They both knew the danger. Too much control, and the original mind could be suppressed entirely, even erased in prolonged states. Their experiments were cut short when Orenya noticed something on the rift's distorted sensors. A faint echo of a transponder code, buried in the static. She recognized it instantly, the encrypted signature of an Arcanist diplomatic courier, one that should have been decommissioned decades ago. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Or deliberate," Rhaegar countered. Hours later, while surveying a derelict way station caught in a mana eddy, they found a shard of armor bearing the crest of House Theron wedged into the bulkhead. Orenya's jaw tightened. "It's him," she said aloud, her voice hard as steel. Rhaegar studied the fragment, then her face. "You're sure?" "As sure as I've ever been." He didn't dismiss her claim, but his silence told her he wanted more proof. Somewhere in the rift, her uncle had been, or still was, and now they knew he could move in places where no sane man would tread. They had just navigated the final mana currents toward the rift's border when the trap sprang. From behind the fractured hull of a drifting prison ship, a swarm of black and red skiffs shot forward, their hulls painted with the jagged insignia of the Varan Syndicate. Orenya's stomach dropped. The Syndicate were mercenaries for hire, and the only one with the reach to employ them here was someone with imperial influence. The answer was obvious, and her uncle's name pulsed in her mind. The mercenaries' weapons were not standard blasters. They fired crystal-tipped projectiles wrapped in shimmering sigils, each impact sending a brief spike of static through the link, scrambling their shared senses. Every shot was designed not to kill outright, but to break their coordination. The skirmish erupted in the skeletal remains of a rift way station, its shattered walkways and drifting debris forming a lethal maze. Rhaegar's instincts screamed to strike first, and he did, launching their vessels' forward cannons to blast two skiffs into shards before they could flank. But the enemy was disciplined, splitting their fire to keep both Rhaegar and Orenya off balance. A sharp burst of static slammed through the bond, and Orenya staggered, her grip on the controls faltering. "Switch with me," Rhaegar's thought cut through the noise, more command than request. Before she could answer, control of her limbs shifted, her hands snapping back to the helm, her body moving with his precision. It was like being locked in the back seat of herself, watching her arms respond to a will that wasn't hers. The sensation was jarring, almost invasive, but she felt his focus sharpen around them, steering the ship through impossible turns while firing counterbursts with mechanical efficiency. "You're enjoying this too much," she muttered aloud, though her voice came out with his steady calm. With him at the controls, they dove between two collapsing gantries, forcing three skiffs to collide in their wake, and broke through the ring of fire to open space. The escape left an aftertaste, a lingering pull in the link, as if part of her body still remembered his grip. She realized with a chill that the control could last longer if they let it, maybe even indefinitely. They tested the limits later and found they could hold the switch for only minutes before the strain blurred their thoughts. It was Rygar who first suggested the obvious. In battle, one could handle movement while the other directed the fight, blending strength and strategy without pause. Aurenya agreed, though neither voiced the deeper truth, that this ability made them more dangerous than either empire had intended. If they chose, they could become something beyond soldiers or symbols. They could become unstoppable. They found him at the rift's hollow, a jagged chasm where raw mana pooled like a liquid ocean, its surface rippling with violet fire. Aurenya had barely stepped onto the fractured platform when a figure emerged from the shimmering haze. Lord Theron, draped in a dark travel cloak lined with runic thread, his eyes glinting with the same cold calculation she remembered from whispered conspiracies. Flanking him were 4 armored retainers, their insignia scrubbed clean, but their movements bearing the precision of Imperial-trained killers. "Niece?" Theron's voice carried easily over the hum of the rift. "You've wandered far from the safety of your throne room." She felt the bond flare with Rygar's recognition of the man's stance. Predator ready to strike. His motive spilled out in his next words. "The Empire does not need the heart of resonance. It needs a ruler who will not shackle us to the Steel Star leash." Theron moved first. From beneath his cloak came a lance of condensed mana, the weapon's tip blazing white-hot. Rygar met him head-on, the clash sending shockwaves across the platform. But Theron fought with the speed of someone who had studied Rygar's methods through Aurenya's memories. A feint, a pivot, and the lance found a seam in Rygar's armor just beneath the left pauldron. The impact tore through flesh and muscle, and Rygar staggered, blood flooding into his lungs. Through the bond, Aurenya felt it all, the sharp, metallic taste, the searing heat, the sudden weakness in his limbs. He tried to lift his blade again, but his knees buckled. "No," she whispered, but the link was already opening wider. "Take it," his voice was in her mind, ragged but certain. The next breath, her perspective shifted. She was inside him, inside the breadth of his strength, the iron weight of his muscles, the reach of his arms. The sensation was overwhelming, like holding a storm in her hands. She moved and his body obeyed with the precision of years of training. The retainers fell first, blades shattering against parries they could not predict. Theron pressed harder, his lance striking in blurs, but Rygar's reflexes under her command were something else, untethered by hesitation, driven by her sharper angles and his raw power. The fight ended when she caught his weapon mid-thrust, twisted, and drove Rygar's armored fist into his jaw with enough force to drop him. For a heartbeat, the urge to finish it, to crush his throat, to end the threat, roared so loud she almost couldn't hear Rygar's voice calling her back. Her grip on the body trembled before she forced herself to release it, stepping back into herself. Theron lay unconscious at their feet, but the echo of that power and the shadow of how close she had come to losing herself in it lingered like the rift's hum in her bones. The pounding in her head was like war drums, each beat telling her to end it, to crush the life from the man who had tried to destroy them both. Her grip on Rygar's gauntleted fist tightened, the weight of the blow coiled and ready. The world had narrowed to Theron's prone form and the pulse in his throat. Then, through the storm, Rygar's voice came, steady, cutting through the haze. "If you kill him now, you become what he says you are." The words anchored her, pulling her back from the brink. She let out a sharp breath and stepped away, the sensation of his strength draining from her limbs as she returned to her own body. It felt like surfacing from deep water, her lungs burning, her mind raw. Even with the danger past, the echo of that fury lingered in her chest, a shadow she knew she would carry. Theron lay unconscious, blood at the corner of his mouth. Rhaegar, propped against a jagged shard of the platform, coughed once and rasped, "Alive, he's more dangerous than dead. But dead, he's a martyr." That was reason enough to keep him breathing. When Theron stirred, His eyes burned with a twisted pride. You think this changes anything? The rift will not be the only battlefield. Your empires are already at each other's throats. Then he smiled, slow and knowing. There's a fleet gathering in the shadow of Orion's gate. Not ours. Not yours. The words made Orenya's stomach knot. If true, a third power was moving, one that could shatter both alliances. The plan to return quietly was gone. Now they needed proof, and quickly. Binding the Ron was no simple task. His retainer's armor carried embedded wards that resisted Rygar's commands. It took Avon's reinforced restraints, conjured in moments, to hold him. When you return, the Archmage said grimly over the comm, he will be judged by the High Tribunal, but keep him breathing. His tongue may yet save lives. The fight had changed more than their strategy. The bond between Orenya and Rygar now felt like an open channel without walls. Every flicker of thought, every shift in emotion flowed freely. She felt the steady throb of his wound, the grind of his pain, just as he felt the tremor still in her hands. Privacy had become a relic. There was no hiding a doubt or a fear. It was unsettling, but also strangely steadying. They spoke little on the flight back, yet the decisions they made about securing Theran, about seeking Orion's gate, were reached in perfect unison. The question was no longer whether they could trust each other. It was what they would become, now that trust had no boundaries. By the time their ship breached the atmosphere of Arcanus Prime, the news had already run ahead of them like wildfire. Couriers and coded transmissions carried whispers of an assassination attempt in the rift, each retelling more dramatic than the last. Some claimed Rygar had been slain, others that Orenya had turned her blade on her own blood. When they stepped down onto the palace landing platform, the air was thick with the tension of half-truths. Guards stiffened as they passed, not in salute, but in wary acknowledgement. In the marble corridors, the usual measured pace of court attendance was replaced by hurried steps and hushed exchanges. It was clear that rival factions were already twisting the event to their advantage. Orenya caught the insignia of House Dareth on more than one whispered messenger, and she knew they had always coveted a weakened throne. They were summoned before the High Council within the hour. The chamber was a vast ring of silver seats beneath a domed ceiling, painted with the constellations of the founding worlds. The Emperor sat at the head, his expression carved from stone. "My daughter," he began, "why did I learn of an ambush in the rift from rumors rather than your own voice? And why is my brother bound in your custody?" Orenya kept her gaze steady. "Because, Father, this was no chance encounter. Lord Theran sought to sever the alliance by ending our bond. He failed, but he carries knowledge of a threat neither empire can ignore." She let her words hang, careful not to betray the intimacy of her link with Rygar. Rygar's voice entered the exchange then, low but carrying across the chamber. "I saw the fleet he spoke of, not Arcanus, not Steel Star, something else. If you dismiss this, you invite a war you cannot prepare for?" The council murmured in unease, glances darting like knives. Some eyes narrowed in suspicion, others calculating the political weight of this revelation. No decree was made that day, but the undercurrent was clear. Neither of them was entirely welcome in these halls anymore. The danger revealed itself in smaller moments. A palace guard posted outside their quarters, who was not on the official roster, a coded message intercepted in Orenya's personal channel, the lingering presence of House Dareth envoys at every turn. The quiet warning came from Avon himself. He found them in the shadow of the western colonnade, his voice barely above a breath. "If you stay, you'll fight battles in every corridor until you fall. Leave while you can choose your ground." They didn't need to argue the point. Remaining meant becoming pawns, surrounded and picked apart by politics until neither their bond nor their cause mattered. The plan took shape quickly. They would leave under the guise of a diplomatic envoy to a neutral world, using a supply ship whose departure was already scheduled. At midnight, with only Avon and the ship's captain aware, they would vanish from the palace docks. Not as fugitives, but as free agents, before the court could decide to clip their wings entirely. Their first destination was set, Korvath Station, a neutral trade hub straddling the border between Arcanus and Steel Star space. From there, they could slip into the unaligned systems without drawing immediate pursuit. Avon had already arranged a contact, Captain Rin, a smuggler with a spotless public record and a far less spotless reality, who owed him a favor from decades past. She would provide passage, cover stories, and access to safe houses beyond Imperial jurisdiction. Supplies were gathered quietly over 5 days. Ryger oversaw the acquisition of weapons, modular blasters, collapsible vibroblades, and a set of enhanced armor plates light enough for stealth work, while Orenya handled provisions, forged identification codes, and encrypted comms. Every item was moved into the supply ship under the guise of routine cargo rotation, the ship's manifest altered to match. The preparation was meticulous, timed to the palace's weekly trade dispatch so that their absence would not be noticed until they were long gone. Saying farewell to the few they trusted was harder than packing. Orenya found her chief handmaiden, Sarah, in the quiet of the tapestry hall. "If they ask, tell them you don't know where I've gone," Orenya said softly. Sarah's eyes shimmered, but she nodded, her voice firm. "I will tell them only that you left as you always lived, on your own terms." Rhaegar had fewer ties within the palace, but he did stop by the barracks to leave a simple, encrypted message for Commander Var, the only superior he still respected. "Do not look for me. Guard the border well." Those who received their parting words reacted with a mixture of sorrow and steel, each promising silence. Avon, as always, spoke the least. "Go far. Return only when you cannot be ignored." That final night in the palace was unnervingly still. They met in Orenya's private study, the balcony doors open to the cool night air, the city lights stretching to the horizon. They spoke of practicalities first, routes, safe channels, the need to avoid Orion's Gate until they knew more. But the conversation drifted toward quieter confessions. Orenya admitted she had never truly felt at home in the palace since the rift. Rhaegar, after a long pause, told her he had not felt at home anywhere since Vargath Prime. There was a moment when neither spoke, simply listening to the low hum of the city. Before dawn, they stood in the shadow of the supply docks, dressed in unmarked travel gear. Looking back at the palace spires, Orenya felt an odd blend of relief and grief, like shedding armor she had worn too long. Rhaegar's thought reached her through the bond, steady and certain. The future will come. We'll meet it head-on. She believed him, but the shape of that future was still a horizon lost in darkness. They were less than an hour from departure when the sky above the Rythar Plateau split with the roar of engines. The lead ship of the pursuing formation bore the black and silver crest of House Dareth, and at its helm was Lord Varric Dareth himself, a man whose ambition had been sharpened by years of political frustration. For months, House Dareth had thrived on the tension between the Arcanis Empire and the Steel Star Alliance, using every diplomatic crack to edge closer to power. Orenya and Rhaegar's bond was the single most visible proof that the treaty could hold, and that made them dangerous to Varric's designs. If he could destroy them before they left the planet, he could claim they had died as traitors or casualties of an unfortunate accident, discrediting the Heart of Resonance entirely. With the symbol broken, he could rally support for severing ties with the Steel Star and push the Empire toward war, a war from which House Dareth would profit. Varric had brought 6 interceptor craft, their needle-shaped hulls tuned for high-atmosphere pursuit, engines howling as they closed the gap. The fleet fanned out to herd the supply ship into the narrow canyons of the plateau, where maneuvering space was scarce, and one misstep meant slamming into rock. The jagged cliffs and twisting ravines became a kill zone, each turn channeled by enemy fire. Through the bond, Orenya felt Varric's intent as clearly as if he had spoken it. He wanted them obliterated, not captured. Rhaegar and Orenya didn't waste breath on discussion. He took command of their physical coordination, piloting through hair's-breadth gaps, throttling the engines at the perfect moment, while Orenya assumed tactical control, plotting escape vectors and manually firing the ship's cannons. They had refined this dual control since the rift, and now it flowed like instinct. Orenya baited the interceptors with feigned stumbles in their flight path, Rhaegar executing sudden climbs and rolls to position them for her precise shots. 2 enemy craft fell to this rhythm, spiraling down in trails of fire. Varric's flagship pressed harder, its forward guns spitting plasma at their port stabilizer. Orenya sent a flash of intent, hard climb, cut left, drop countermeasures, and Rygar executed without hesitation. The maneuver forced Varric into the line of fire from his own wingman, the missile striking his hull in a bloom of orange light. Through the comms, the sudden break in his voice told them fear had finally taken root. The rest of the fleet faltered, unwilling to push further into the canyon where their commander had just been crippled. The escape cost them. The port stabilizer was nearly torn away, and Rygar's left shoulder strained from the punishing manual controls, but they had broken free. As they climbed into the upper atmosphere, the blue curve of Arcanis faded beneath them. Only Avin and Captain Rin, waiting in the shadow of a refueling station, saw their ship slip into the starfield. For the first time since the heart of resonance, the galaxy ahead of them felt wide open. Rygar's thought reached her first, steady and sure. We live, and because we live, he fails. And as the darkness of space embraced them, Orenya knew that survival had just become their first victory as a force beyond any throne. The transmission was brief, sent to both the Imperial Palace and the Steel Star High Command. It contained no plea, no apology, only a formal renunciation of all ranks, titles, and duties. For Orenya, the words were both liberation and an ache she hadn't expected. Without the title of princess, she felt lighter, stripped of the constant weight of expectation, yet the absence of that mantle left her momentarily adrift, as though she'd stepped off a ship into open air. Rygar's reaction was simpler. He had walked away from the Steel Star before, in spirit, if not in name. I served them long enough to know they'll survive without me, he said, though there was a flicker in his mind, an old loyalty now laid to rest. Within a week, emissaries from both sides reached out in guarded tones, offering them positions as special envoys, covert operatives, even commanders of independent forces. Each offer was met with the same answer, spoken by Orenya, but carried equally in Rygar's thoughts. We answer to no banner now. They chose a base far from contested borders, a hollowed asteroid drifting in the Serath Belt, its tunnels rich in natural monoflows that could power both starships and spellwork. From here, they would operate under a single principle, act where neither empire could, to protect the fragile balance between worlds. Their first mission was already waiting. A mining colony at Foros 9 had sent a distress call about raiders, ignored by both Imperial and Alliance patrols. It was in the asteroid's main chamber, beneath a web of glowing monoconduits, that they made their oath. Rygar spoke first. For as long as we breathe, no threat will stand unchecked between our worlds. Orenya added, we are the heart that beats in two chests, the blade that strikes in one hand. The monoconduits pulsed once, as if sealing their vow. Their new path began with a single jump toward Foros 9. The ship hummed around them, stripped of all insignia, its systems tuned to their shared reflexes. With no crew but themselves, every task, every decision, was divided and executed in perfect tandem. It was strange, trusting someone else with every breath and knowing they felt the same trust in return. The link had grown again. Now they could anticipate each other's thoughts before they fully formed, sometimes moving in the same instant without conscious intent. Where it might lead them, they didn't know. But when Orenya looked out at the streaking stars and Rygar's thought brushed hers, the future is ours to shape, she found that, for the first time, she truly believed it. They left behind palaces and battlefields, allies and enemies alike, stepping into the uncharted with nothing but each other and the bond that had once been a prison. In its place, they had built something neither empire could command, a force unbound, answering only to their own oath. The galaxy would come to know them not as symbols of a fragile treaty, but as a shadow and a shield, moving where diplomacy failed and armies could not tread. And in the silent moments between stars, when no enemy pressed and no ally called, they would still be there. Two voices, two memories, two wills, moving as one. Whatever storms gathered on the horizon, they would face them not as princess and knight, but as something far rarer. The resonant hearts were free and the galaxy would never be the same.